Welcome, folks, and let me spin you a tale of heartbreak, redemption, and the miraculous twist of fate. Enjoy the story. It was a scorching, hot June day in New York City. The sun's rays bore down mercilessly on the sweltering sidewalks as Sarah Jones, a seemingly innocent young woman with curly blonde hair, an upturned nose, and big, trusting gray eyes, strolled down the street. With her modest floral sundress, baseball cap, and blue sneakers, the 22-year-old had the look of a small-town girl who was way out of her element in the big city. Little did anyone know, Sarah's life was about to take a twist drastically different from her once affluent upbringing. "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to Garden Street?" Sarah asked a sharply dressed businessman walking briskly past her. "I'm supposed to be interviewing at the Success Corporation building." The man barely glanced at her. "2 blocks that way, turn right," he mumbled, gesturing vaguely down the street before rushing off. Sarah continued down the sidewalk, dodging pedestrians as she followed the businessman's directions. She was really hoping to land this secretarial job at Success Corp. Ever since her life had taken that dramatic turn, she'd been desperately searching for any kind of employment to support herself. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness washed over Sarah. She reached out and grabbed a nearby lamppost to steady herself as dark spots danced before her eyes. A concerned older woman stopped beside her. "Oh dear, are you all right, miss?" the woman asked, eyeing Sarah's slightly protruding belly. "When are you due?" Sarah shook her head, still gripping the lamppost. No, you've got it wrong. I'm not pregnant." But the bulge under her dress told a different story. Sarah knew she couldn't hide her delicate condition forever, but she wasn't ready to share the shocking details with anyone just yet. "I'll be fine, thanks," she assured the woman, waving her off as the dizziness passed. Sarah continued on her way, hoping against hope she could find someone willing to hire a seemingly pregnant girl with no job experience. Sarah finally arrived at the Success Corporation building, a modern 2-story office with a huge glitzy billboard advertising their services. As she entered the sleek lobby, she immediately felt out of place and underdressed compared to the chic, well-coiffed female employees. One particularly snooty-looking young blonde in a tight skirt suit and stilettos looked Sarah up and down with disdain. "Oh great, another maid trying to sneak in through the front," she sneered to her friend. Sarah flushed red, but kept her head held high as she approached the front desk. "I have an interview with Mr. Alexander Wilson for the secretarial position." The receptionist's overplucked eyebrows shot up. "You? An interview? With Mr. Wilson himself?" She let out a derisive laugh. "Good luck with that, honey." Just then, a distinguished-looking older man in an impeccable suit strode out of the nearby office. Even Sarah could tell he was someone important just from his air of authority and confidence. "You must be Miss Jones," the man said, offering Sarah a warm smile that crinkled the laugh lines around his eyes. "I'm Alexander Wilson. Shall we get started with that interview?" The snooty blonde's jaw dropped in surprise as Sarah followed the company CEO into his corner office. Maybe her luck was finally about to change. "Please have a seat, Miss Jones," Mr. Wilson said, gesturing to a plush leather chair across from his immense mahogany desk. "Now, I like to get right down to it in interviews, so let me ask you, what makes you feel you're qualified for this position?" Sarah took a deep breath, mustering her courage. "To be perfectly honest, Mr. Wilson, I don't have any direct secretarial experience, but I am an extremely hard worker, dedicated to doing whatever job I'm given to the best of my abilities." She pulled a well-worn paperback book from her tote bag. "This is one of my most prized possessions, a dictionary. I've been studying it every night, making sure my spelling and grammar are impeccable." Mr. Wilson leaned back in his chair, stroking his chin thoughtfully as Sarah spoke. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You know, Miss Jones, I get job applicants in here every day with decades of experience and long, fancy resumes," he said. "But I have to say, your honesty and humility are quite refreshing. There's an earnestness about you that I like." Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe her unconventional approach was actually working in her favor for once. "However," Mr. Wilson continued, "I should mention that the secretarial position entails quite a few sensitive responsibilities that I'm not sure someone in your delicate condition would be well suited for." Sarah's heart sank as she realized he'd noticed her bulging belly. Of course, the pregnancy was going to be yet another roadblock for her. "Sir, I know what you must be thinking," she said carefully, "but I can assure you that, despite my situation, I am fully committed to taking on any duties this job would require. All I need is an opportunity to prove myself." Mr. Wilson held her gaze for a long moment, seeming to weigh her words. Finally, he let out a deep sigh and shrugged. "What the hell? I have a good feeling about you, Miss Jones. Consider yourself hired, for now. We'll sort out the details of your salary and such after a reasonable probationary period to make sure you're a good fit here." He rose and extended his hand. Sarah leapt up and shook it gratefully, trying to blink back tears of relief and joy. "You won't regret this, Mr. Wilson, I promise." "We'll see," he chuckled. "Oh, and one more thing. We'll need to get you some proper business attire more suited for the office. Here's $500 to start for some basics." He handed her a crisp stack of bills, which Sarah accepted with trembling hands. This was really happening. She actually had a job, and seemingly with a kind, generous boss willing to take a chance on her. "Thank you, sir. You have no idea what this means to me." Little did Sarah know, this shocking new beginning was only the start of her wild, unbelievable journey. As Sarah left the Success Corporation building, her head was still spinning from her stroke of good luck. But her mind inevitably wandered back to the tragic events that had brought her life crashing down so dramatically. Just last year, she had been Sarah Carmichael, a bright, ambitious student at NYU with her whole future ahead of her. She was deeply, deliriously in love with Alex, a kind-hearted, if somewhat aimless young man from an extremely wealthy Upper East Side family. The Carmichaels had been aghast at their son's relationship with Sarah, whose own humble background as an orphan raised in the foster system was unacceptable to them. After a particularly explosive argument where Mr. Carmichael accused Sarah of being a gold-digging grifter, Alex had stubbornly moved out and gotten his own place. "I don't care about their money, Sarah," he had assured her as they unpacked their meager belongings in the cheap studio apartment. "All I need is you." To support them, Alex had taken a job as a taxi driver, while Sarah continued working towards her degree. For a brief, shining moment, the couple had been deliriously happy living their simple life together. That all changed one fateful night when Alex worked the late shift. A drunk driver had run a red light, smashing into the taxi and killing Alex instantly. Just like that, the love of Sarah's life was gone forever. The devastated girl had soon discovered she was pregnant with Alex's child, a tiny miraculous piece of him that was all she had left in the world. With no family, no money, and no husband, Sarah had been well and truly alone. She dropped out of school and took a series of low-wage jobs just to scrape by, counting the days until her baby's arrival. More than once, the heartbroken, frightened young woman had thought about having an abortion. But she knew Alex would have wanted this child, and she clung to that as the last piece of him she had left in the world. As Sarah made her way back to her cramped walk-up studio, she tenderly rested a hand on her swollen belly. "Don't worry, little one," she whispered. "Mommy's going to take really good care of you. This job at Success Corp is our chance to start over and make a good life for ourselves." Unlocking the door, she stepped into the tiny, sparsely furnished apartment. A pang of sadness struck her at the sight of Alex's battered old guitar propped in the corner, a relic of all their shattered dreams. Sarah moved to the window, gazing out over the city skyline in the fading evening light. This was supposed to be their future, Alex pursuing his music while she worked her way up the corporate ladder. They'd get married, have a family, live a perfect life together. Tears stung her eyes as she caressed the delicate locket around her neck, the only possession of her birth mother's she had. The locket contained an old photo of a smiling young woman with thick blonde curls and dimpled cheeks. Literally the only clue Sarah had about her mysterious origins. "I'm going to give this baby everything I never had," Sarah vowed fiercely. "A real family, a good home, unconditional love. I don't care what I have to do or who I have to defy. This child will be my redemption from a life of loneliness." She knew it wouldn't be easy, but Sarah had always been a fighter. With this job at Success Corp, she finally felt like she had a chance to turn her tragic situation around once and for all. Sarah's first few days at Success Corporation were, in a word, hellish. No matter how hard she tried, her chic, beautifully made-up colleagues seemed to go out of their way to ostracize and humiliate the poor pregnant girl. "Oh, look, the receptionist is finally here." Helen Peterson, the haughty head of the secretarial pool, loudly mocked as Sarah entered the office each morning. "I guess Mr. Wilson is really scraping the bottom of the barrel with his hires these days." Sarah just gritted her teeth and got to work, determined to prove her worth despite the cruel bullying. She stayed late every night, diligently handling any tasks Mr. Wilson assigned her to the absolute best of her abilities. But the vicious rumor mill kept churning, with some of the more outrageous whispers suggesting Sarah was actually Mr. Wilson's secret mistress, and that the baby was his. Others insisted she must be a corporate spy or con artist trying to swindle her way into the company's secrets. "You can stop with the little innocent act whenever you're ready," Helen sneered one afternoon, slamming a stack of files onto Sarah's desk hard enough to make her jump. "We all know you're just using that baby bump to try and squeeze out of doing any real work around here." Sarah flinched at the verbal assault, her big eyes filling with tears of humiliation and rage. How dare these people judge her without knowing a single thing about her struggles? That night, after everyone else had gone home, Sarah stayed behind to straighten up Mr. Wilson's office. As she was organizing his desk, she noticed a stray document sticking out from between the files. She gasped as she scanned the incriminating letter. "Alex, I've tried being patient, but I'm at the end of my rope here. If you don't sign over controlling interest in Success Corp to me by the end of this month, I'll have no choice but to go public with those little indiscretions of yours from a few years back. You know the ones I mean. The money laundering, the offshore bank accounts, all of it. This is your last warning. H." Sarah's head spun as she realized what this letter meant. Helen was brazenly trying to blackmail Mr. Wilson into handing over his company. She had to do something to warn him, but she couldn't just barge into his office making wild accusations without proof. Thinking quickly, Sarah pocketed the incriminating letter and did some more digging around Wilson's desk. She soon uncovered a small, secret locked box buried in the back of the bottom drawer. Using a paper clip to expertly pick the lock, a skill she'd learned long ago on the streets, Sarah opened the box. Inside was a small manila envelope containing even more damning evidence: bank statements, cryptocurrency transaction records, and detailed financial ledgers that all pointed to Helen's elaborate money laundering scheme. This was more than enough to take that wretched woman down. But Sarah realized she couldn't go to Wilson directly without raising suspicion about how she obtained this information. Instead, she decided to take an anonymous approach to protect herself. The next morning, Sarah mailed a long letter to Mr. Wilson's home address, cluing him into every single detail of Helen's illegal activities and underhanded blackmail attempt. She also included copies of all the financial documents from the locked box, as well as Helen's incriminating letter she'd found on the desk. "You need to get the authorities involved right away before this snake tries anything else," Sarah wrote at the end, her handwriting carefully disguised. "For your own good, and the good of the company, you have to take action immediately." 2 days later, Sarah was hard at work filing in the secretarial pool when the office was suddenly swarmed by police officers. She watched with a mixture of shock and satisfaction as the smug, self-satisfied Helen Peterson was forcibly dragged out in handcuffs, screaming about her rights being violated. Mr. Wilson emerged from his office, clutching the envelope Sarah had mailed him as he surveyed the scene with a grim expression. His eyes briefly met Sarah's from across the room, full of questions and intensity. The pregnant girl quickly looked away, praying her secret was still safe. Later that afternoon, Mr. Wilson requested Sarah's presence in his office. She entered nervously, wondering if he knew the truth and was about to fire her for going behind his back. Instead, the CEO simply rose from his desk and regarded her with an inscrutable expression. "Miss Jones," he said solemnly, "I find myself in a most unusual situation, and I'm hoping you can help me understand a few things." Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest as she faced Mr. Wilson across his wide mahogany desk. Had he somehow deduced that she was the anonymous whistleblower who exposed Helen's criminal misdeeds? If so, Sarah knew she could potentially be in huge trouble, perhaps even face criminal charges herself for corporate espionage or some such thing. "Is everything okay, sir?" she asked carefully, trying to keep her voice from trembling with nerves. "If this is about what happened with Helen Peterson, I can assure you I had no idea what was going on." Wilson held up a hand to stop her, and Sarah clamped her mouth shut, bracing herself for the worst. To her surprise, the older man simply sighed and sank back down into his plush leather chair, looking suddenly exhausted. "Miss Jones, I'm just going to cut right to the chase," he began heavily. "This entire sordid incident with Helen's underhanded scheming has been quite eye-opening for me. It made me realize how lonely and isolated a person can become when you have no one to truly trust in this world." He paused, giving Sarah an intense look that made her shift uncomfortably in her seat. "Which is why I need to get something off my chest, so to speak. You see, the real reason I decided to take a chance and hire you here at Success Corp had nothing to do with Helen or any of this other nastiness." With surprising tenderness, Wilson reached across the desk toward Sarah. "It was because of this." Before she could react, his hand had gently plucked the locket from where it rested against Sarah's chest, letting the delicate gold pendant dangle from his fingertips. Sarah watched with bated breath, utterly confused, as Wilson carefully pried open the locket's intricate clasp. He stared at the faded photograph inside for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, wordlessly, he turned the locket toward Sarah so she could see the image, a smiling young woman with thick blonde curls and dimpled cheeks. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she recognized her lone, tenuous link to her mysterious biological mother. "Where did you get this?" Wilson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah blinked at him in bewilderment. It was the only thing I had from my mother," she stammered. "She left me at an orphanage as a newborn. That locket was how she wanted me to be identified." To Sarah's shock, tears had sprung into the older man's eyes. With a trembling hand, he pulled his wallet from his jacket pocket and removed a worn photograph, laying it on the desk beside the open locket. It was an image of the same smiling young woman, this time arm in arm with a dashing younger version of Alexander Wilson himself. "Her name was Tanya," Wilson said hoarsely. "My first wife before the accident that took her from me so many years ago." He looked back up at Sarah, his eyes shining with desperate hope and longing. "This is going to sound crazy, but I think you might be my daughter, Miss Jones. The daughter Tanya gave up for adoption before she and I ever met." Sarah's mind was utterly reeling from this shocking bombshell. She wanted so badly for it to be true, to finally discover her long-lost family after a lifetime of loneliness and abandonment. But part of her was terrified of allowing herself that hope, only to be crushed and disappointed yet again. "Mr. Wilson, I don't know what to say," she stammered, feeling lightheaded. The older man reached across and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Please, call me Alex," he said gently, "and say nothing for now. We'll get a DNA test scheduled right away to find out for certain if we're truly father and daughter. But I have to warn you, if the results show we are related, it's going to open up an entire can of worms about your mother and her past that I've spent years trying to forget." Sarah could only nod mutely, her brain still spinning as a million different thoughts and emotions battled within her. She knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same after this, no matter what the DNA results revealed. Over the next few days, Sarah struggled to focus on anything but the burning question of her potential relationship to Alex Wilson. She found herself studying his familiar features whenever they were in the same room, searching for a resemblance to her own. Finally, the fateful day arrived when they would get the DNA results. Sarah had never felt so nervous as she followed Alex into a private genetics clinic, gripping the strap of her tote bag like a lifeline. The doctor was solemn as he revealed the test findings. Sarah and Alex were not, in fact, biological relatives after all. A crushing wave of disappointment washed over the young woman, bringing stinging tears to her eyes despite her efforts to stay strong. Alex looked equally crestfallen for a moment, But then his expression hardened into one of determination as he turned to the doctor. "All right, if we're not related by blood, then there's only one other possibility," he stated firmly. "Please tell me everything you were able to find out about this young woman's biological parents and history." The doctor cleared his throat and consulted his file. "Well, from the DNA analysis we were able to deduce that Miss Jones's biological mother was indeed your late wife, Tanya Wilson. However, the paternal DNA sample didn't match your own. It seems Mrs. Wilson was already pregnant when the two of you met and married." Sarah felt her head spinning, overwhelmed by this second shocking revelation. So she wasn't Alex's daughter after all, but she was the child his wife had given up shortly before meeting him? "Do you have any other information that could identify the father?" Alex pressed urgently. "Any details at all about who he was or Tanya's life before me?" The doctor shook his head solemnly. "I'm afraid not, Mr. Wilson. The paternal DNA didn't match any individuals in our databases. Without knowing the father's name or having a DNA sample from him directly, there's no way for us to determine his identity." Alex sank back in his chair, looking utterly crestfallen. After all these years, he had finally found a connection to his beloved late wife, only to have it snatched away cruelly. Sarah could see the pain and disappointment etched on his features. "Thank you, doctor," he said hoarsely. "That will be all." As they exited the clinic in silence, the weight of this revelation hung heavily between them. Finally, Alex spoke up. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can only imagine how devastating this must be for you, to come so close to finding your family only to be denied again. Believe me, I understand that profound longing better than anyone." Sarah just nodded mutely, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. In that moment, she felt a profound kinship with this man she'd known only a few weeks. They were both orphans in their own way, longing for that missing piece of their pasts. "Maybe we're not bound by blood or DNA," Alex continued, taking her hand and giving it a gentle squeeze. "But I can't help feeling like our paths were meant to cross for a reason. You've already done so much for me by exposing that snake Helen's schemes. You're the first person who's made me feel understood and less alone in longer than I can remember." He met Sarah's eyes with an intense gaze. "Which is why I have an important proposal for you, if you'll hear me out. One that could benefit us both greatly." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat, both dreading and desperately hoping for what she imagined he was about to suggest. Could this man, this virtual stranger, who had briefly seemed like the father she'd always dreamed of, actually be offering her a real family and a new lease on life? What did you have in mind?" she managed to ask. Alex gave her hand another reassuring squeeze. "How would you feel about me adopting you?" he said simply. "Becoming your legal father in every sense of the word except biology?" Sarah's eyes went wide at the shocking proposal. Part of her wanted to instantly cry out yes and throw herself into this man's arms, to finally have the parent she'd always longed for. But the more pragmatic side of her held reservations. What were his ulterior motives here? Was this just a ploy to keep her under his control after she'd proven so invaluable in taking down Helen? I don't know what to say," she stammered, her thoughts whirling. "Why would you possibly want to do that for me? I'm just nobody, a girl you hired out of desperation who happened to stumble onto a conspiracy." "That's where you're wrong, Sarah," Alex said firmly. "You are most certainly not nobody, not anymore. You showed incredible bravery and integrity in how you handled that whole mess with Helen. More importantly, you've made me feel a connection I never expected, in the wake of finally learning the truth about Tanya's past." His eyes shone with sincerity and tenderness. "I see so much of her warmth and spirit in you. Taking you into my home, my life, as my own daughter, it would be like getting a second chance at the family I thought was lost to me forever. We can take this journey together, you and I. We'll never be alone again." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks at his heartfelt words. Her deepest, most secret childhood dream was being offered up to her on a silver platter. But she had to be sure. "And what about—" She rested a protective hand on her swollen belly. Alex's expression softened. "That baby will be the most loved, cherished child in the entire world," he vowed. "I'll be the doting grandfather I never got a chance to be. We can give this little one everything, the family, the home, the unconditional love that we've both been deprived of for far too long. That was all Sarah needed to hear. Letting out a joyful sob, she flung herself into Alex's arms, holding him tightly. "Yes!" she cried. "Oh yes, I would be so honored and grateful for you to be my father. You've already given me such an incredible gift just by believing in me and offering me this chance." Alex held Sarah tightly, stroking her hair in a paternal gesture as she wept tears of overwhelming joy and relief against his shoulder. After a lifetime of loneliness, she had finally found her family. There, my dear," he murmured soothingly. "Everything's going to be all right now. We'll get through all of this together, you'll see." Over the next few weeks, a veritable whirlwind of activity surrounded Sarah's adoption by Alexander Wilson. A team of high-priced corporate lawyers handled all the official paperwork and legal maneuverings to make it official, while Alex personally oversaw the redecorating of one of the large guest suites in his sprawling Upper East Side penthouse to create the perfect bedroom for his new daughter. "Spare no expense," he instructed the interior designers. "This is going to be a fresh start for Sarah, a sanctuary where she can begin her new life in absolute comfort and security." Sarah found herself whisked along for the wild ride, getting outfitted in an entire designer maternity wardrobe and accepting a generous monthly allowance from her new father to ensure she wanted for nothing during her pregnancy. It was a dizzying adjustment to go from desperate, struggling single mom to being the beloved daughter of one of New York's most wealthy and powerful CEOs. Part of her still wondered if this too-good-to-be-true turn of events was just a dream that she would wake up from at any moment. But Alex's deep paternal affection and doting seemed to only grow stronger with each passing day, erasing any lingering doubts. The staff at Success Corp, meanwhile, could hardly believe the shocking news when it was announced that Sarah was Alexander Wilson's long-lost daughter, rescued from a life of hardship and reunited with her birth family at long last. Her formerly scornful colleagues like Helen's snide clique now fawned over her, desperate to curry favor with the boss's relation. "We're just so glad you two found each other after all this time," trilled Bambi, the office's resident social climber, batting her mascaraed eyelashes at Sarah. "You simply must allow us to throw you the most incredible baby shower, darling." Sarah simply smiled graciously, her hand resting on her burgeoning belly. She had no interest in pretending to be friends with these vapid women now that her circumstances had changed so drastically. She was part of the Wilson family legacy now. Old money, power, and respect came with the territory. The day she moved into the penthouse suite, Sarah took a moment to gaze around at the lavish space she now called her own. The enormous bedroom, walk-in closet, spa-like bathroom, and cozy sitting room put even the finest hotel accommodations to shame. "This is really all mine?" she murmured in awe, running an admiring hand over the plush silken bedspread. A warm chuckle sounded from the doorway, and Sarah turned to see Alex leaning against the frame watching her with a tender smile. "I told you, I want my daughter to have only the very best of everything," he said simply, crossing to join her. "After all you've been through, you deserve to be spoiled and pampered to your heart's content." Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes as she impulsively hugged him tightly. "I don't even know how to begin thanking you for all of this. You've given me something more precious than all the riches in the world. A real family, a home, a father's unconditional love. I'll never be able to repay you." Alex cupped her face in his hands, his eyes shining with pure adoration and paternal devotion. "Just being my daughter, loving this child the way I know you will, is all the thanks I could ever want or need. We've been given a second chance, you and I plan to cherish every moment." As they embraced again, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace and belonging wash over her. She was home at last, with a father who adored her and a safe, loving environment for her baby. Her tragic past of abandonment and struggle was finally just a fading memory. 7 months later, Sarah cradled her beautiful newborn daughter against her chest as she gazed out over the twinkling Manhattan skyline from the penthouse's grand picture window. The baby girl had Alex's bright blue eyes and a downy cap of blonde hair, and Sarah's heart overflowed with pure love and contentment just drinking in her precious features. "Have you decided on a name for my granddaughter yet?" a kind voice inquired from behind her. Sarah turned to see Alex entering the nursery, an indulgent smile playing across his face as he approached them. "I was thinking, Grace," Sarah replied softly, nuzzling her cheek against the baby's soft head. "Grace Alexandra Wilson, to honor the two most important men in our lives, the father she'll never know, and the one who's given us a second chance." Alex's eyes glistened with tears as he tenderly stroked the infant's chubby cheek. "It's a beautiful name, my darling. Simply beautiful, just like both of my girls." He gathered them both into his embrace, and Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, overwhelmed by the feeling of unconditional love surrounding her and her child. Just last year, she had been a frightened young woman with nothing, no family, no home, no future, aside from raising her baby alone in poverty and hardship. And now, here she was, the cherished daughter of a powerful Manhattan elite, wanted for nothing, with the promise of a bright future for herself and little Grace. All thanks to the generous heart of this man who had opened his life to them when he didn't have to. "I'll never be able to thank you enough for this, Dad," Sarah whispered, using the title she never dreamed she'd get to say again after being orphaned. Alex just squeezed her tighter, his eyes shining. "No thanks are necessary, my Sarah," he murmured gruffly. "You and Grace are the greatest gifts an old man like me could ever receive. Just being part of this family, watching my granddaughter grow up happy and loved, that's more than enough for me." As she cuddled her infant daughter close, Sarah knew those words rang true. This shocking, unbelievable series of events, from poverty to luxury, loneliness to family, despair to hope, had given her something more precious than all the riches in the world. For the first time in her young life, Sarah felt truly, deeply, blissfully complete. She had a home, she had a father's love, and she had her beautiful daughter to cherish. All the pain and struggle of her tragic past seemed like a distant dream. This was her reality now. A new life, a new beginning, and most importantly, the family she had always dreamed of, but feared she might never find. As Sarah held baby Grace close, she whispered a silent promise to her precious daughter, one that she intended to keep for the rest of her life. "We're never going to be alone again, Grace. You and I will always have each other, and we'll always be surrounded by the unconditional love of our family.